Okay, the recording is on. Okay, so I'll introduce myself again. My name is Max Musau. I'm the learning lead at DeCodEd Africa.
Here's what I found on the web.
DeCodEd and Google developers had partnered to create like a series of webinars for developers on air. And essentially, it's a way to keep engaging developer communities, which is both our focus throughout this COVID-19 period. So we're excited to have everyone here. Today's topic is around betting on the right tech. And we have a series of other really interesting topics. Last week was Hello World product, and the following week will be designing and building scalable products. And we have really interesting speakers and mentors who will be joining us. So I'm really excited about that. Alela, do we have the presentation up? Okay, as she puts that up. So today we'll be talking about what are the right tools, picking the right tools for the right project. In other words, betting on the right tech. You know, there are so many tools, frameworks, languages, and platforms available for developers. Our key speakers will be Eugene and Frank Tamre. Each do web and the other does Android. And will be moderated today by Priscilla, who I'm sure is also here and will introduce herself shortly. Yes, so I want to hand it off to Priscilla.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me, guys?
Yes, Pasi, we can.
All right, thank you. So I just wanted to ask everyone to turn off the video just to preserve each other's bandwidth. We don't need video. Audio would be sufficient. Okay, so thank you for having me. My name is Priscilla Njera. I am a software engineer. I'm based in Nairobi. So I'll be moderating today's session, and so Alela, I don't know if I should be the one to share my screen with the slides so that I can control the slides.
Yes, you can. Sure.
All right. Just a minute.
Okay, so as Pasi is doing that, let me just give you a brief about what the whole program is about. So Google, in partnership with DeCodEd Africa, are hosting a set of webinar series with select CTOs, technical leads, startup founders, and software developers, with an aim of at least keeping the community engaged to ensure that as much as we are not having in-person events, we still get to be part of a larger community. We still get to share the knowledge that they have with other people. So last week we had a session called Hello World to Product, whereby Hannah and Juma Allen got to share how they started from not knowing much about programming to now being software developers in a given field. And then this week now we are having Eugene Mutai and Frank Tambre getting to answer one question that developers mostly face. How do I bet on the right tech? So how do I know that whatever I'm getting myself into is what is going to help me at the end of it? How do I choose one framework as compared to another? So the session is going to be moderated by Priscilla Njera. And as Max already introduced, so Max is coming from the DeCodEd side. So DeCodEd is really doing work on the front of just ensuring at least the community also is kept engaged. Yeah. Pasi, I don't know if we lost Priscilla. Oh, great.
So let me just try this one last time. Can you guys see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you,
All
Percy.
right. So we'll start with introductions. We can start with Frank, then Eugene.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So, hi guys.
All right.
Hi guys. So my
Are
name is
Eugene and Frank here? We can
Yeah.
start with introduction.
Yeah. Can you hear me? I think I'm live. So my name is Frank Tamre. Yeah.
Hi.
Because I was like, what? You can't hear me. What's going on? Yeah, exactly. So I guess this has been part of the routine nowadays. You have to get in and find out whether people can hear you.
You are.
Okay. So my name is Frank Tamre. Wow, yeah. So I currently organize Android 254, Kotlin Kenya, and now most recently I started doing some stuff around Asia and the whole tech community. Probably I'm going to talk about that later. But over and above that, I am a software engineer. I think I've been working in the mobile space specifically from 2013. I started working at Intel, and then I left Intel. Then I co-founded Moringa School, and then I stayed. After that, I left, did a bit of travel and soul searching, and then I started Ali Camp, did that for some time, and then from 2018, I started consulting on the IT side for UN Women, ITU. ITU is the company, is the organization, global organization that is in charge of giving us the plus 254, plus 255 sort of like things. That and African Union on stuff to do like technology and stuff like that. Then I mean it's something that is still continuing anyway, because we're like under contractual stuff for the next couple of years. And most recently, I started working at Snap Mobile. So that's just it. And over and above that, I think because of the Android communities and my love for like mobile and Android, a couple of years ago, myself and some of my friends, we decided to come up with DroidCon, and that is like DroidCon KE, which is it's currently the only Android conference that's run in Africa. So yeah, that's just about me, Pasila.
Very interesting person.
Thank you.
We'll get to know you better during the session. Eugene?
Okay, so my name is Eugene. I am the CTO and co-founder of Raise, which is a company that helps like startups raise capital and investors to manage their two, and also I lead a team of 5 engineers.
Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Yes. I can hear you now. Yes,
okay,
I
so
can hear
yes,
you now.
I lead a team of 4 to 5 engineers. Oh, actually, my apologies. I'm using my Safaricom internet, so when somebody tries to call me, like it's it tries and cuts a bit. Because my home Zuku is just unreliable at this moment in time. It seems like everybody's downloading movies at home right now. Anyway, so yes, I lead a team of 4 engineers. And we majorly write tech on JavaScript. As most of the people know about me, they know that I'm a JavaScript enthusiast. I've always been one for a long time, but I'll surprise you when Jira asks me a certain question. I'm also a blockchain and cryptocurrency enthusiast. That's the other thing people know me about. So yes, I'm pro Bitcoin, I'm pro Ethereum. And I think one other surprising thing and shocking is I used to be a super biker, and I've had like 4 near-death accidents with a super bike. So God really needs me here to share my knowledge. So that's why I'm here.
So you have 5 lives left.
Yeah, I'm technically
Assuming you
no,
have
actually
9.
I have 6 cuts. No, I have 6 lives left, not cuts. I have 6 lives left.
I think Eugene is playing video
Okay,
games.
Eugene.
Eugene is
So I
playing
think we
video
can
games.
start with the
No,
first.
but they say YOLO, man. YOLO.
Okay. I think Pasila, we lost you.
Okay. So I think we lost Pasila for a while,
Yeah, I think.
but I think we can just
Yeah.
dive right
Yeah.
into the questions. So Eugene and Frank, you both have a bit of a background in technology, like a big background. So Tamre, you're known as Priest because of your tech evangelism work. Eugene happens to be one of our web GDEs, Google Developer Expert. So I'm gonna ask simple question, like maybe it's simple or not, but when you started, which stack did you pick, and what really informed your decision into picking whatever stack that you picked or the framework that you picked to use? Because we struggle with this question. Often at times somebody's like, you try Angular, and then another person will tell you try React. So when you come to Android, somebody will tell you try Kotlin, another one will tell you try Java or stick to Flutter. So what really drives the decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis when working on projects? And when you started, what exactly did you start off with? Yeah.
Okay, so Frank, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Just let me just reiterate what Pasila said. Please, if you're on the call, switch off your video because you're sort of eating into other people's bandwidth. So wow, what did I start with? So I guess for me, mine was very interesting. I started with JavaScript, funny enough, HTML, CSS stuff, and JavaScript. So I guess when I started at that time, I don't know, I've always been this guy who likes following the different pathways. And so I remember during that time, there was this framework called Meteor. I think it's still there. It died and then it was revived. And so I picked up Meteor JS, and that's what I used to play around with. And then I think around about that time, when I was working at Intel, we had to do all this Cordova stuff. And so I feel like I sort of like understand web, but I used to find mobile very fascinating because I used to be like, imagine a very small device that I'm holding in my hand can be so much power. You can move around with it. So I started off with that whole JavaScript bit and just playing around with cross-platform, and then came into contact with Java. Never really shifted to Java for like desktop or like enterprise application. So I just stayed specifically Java for like Android development for that matter. And then after some time, I guess so, I when I joined Intel, now we started playing around with a lot with Cordova and stuff like that. So when Cordova was quickly dying, so we had that like insight within the company that this was something that was going to be abandoned. I had to shift to C++ and Java. And so I stayed on C++ and Java for the very longest time doing Android applications. And I guess C++ for me was fun because I would play around with optimizations. And that's like something that I've always been passionate about. Like, how do you make any form of solution that is out there? So like work on a very, I'd say like talk to metal, and that is like on a very hardware sort of like capability conversation, like where processes and systems and memory management, you're just literally I'm just playing around with C++. And so that became something that I was totally passionate about. In between there, I think I started getting, when you're traveling all the time, I picked up a hobby of making games with C#. So C# is something that is like very that way, because I find it used to be like not it used to be, it is closer to Java more than anything. So I was like, this thing makes sense. And that's where I sort of like stopped. And so I continued on with Java, C++, Java, C++ for the longest time until I guess Android Studio happened and Kotlin happened. And then I guess when Kotlin and Android Studio happened, I started really finding some things that I was doing in Java to be more simpler. Like I could achieve such things with Kotlin so fast. And so I quickly dropped or started dropping Java. I haven't 100% dropped it, but I started dropping Java. And then picked up Kotlin. And I guess, I don't know, I've just been playing around with Kotlin ever since. Probably now it's been a part of like 3.5 years, Kotlin. And surprisingly, I wanted to stay away from Flutter, and my new job ended up being in Flutter. So yeah, and I know a lot of Flutter developers kept on laughing at me because of that. So I guess that's me summarized. So Eugene.
Okay, so like my journey has been plain and simple, but with a few lessons in between. The first thing I literally just wanted to do was make websites. That's it. And so like if you just wanted to make websites, the most obvious platform to go to was WordPress. But the thing about WordPress is I never liked the idea that it does a lot of things for you. So I never picked up WordPress. So I just decided to use PHP to write to write websites, and I did that for my first year. That was in 2012. So far, I'm on 8 years of software engineering. So I just started writing websites just using plain old PHP, HTML, and CSS. First of all, that led me to learn a lot of fundamentals of how basically the browser connects with the backend, and then how the backend connects to the database. And then eventually I picked up a framework. I can't really remember what it is. It's an Australian framework. Even I don't think it's even known. It's called something like Silver Stripe. We were working. I got a job somehow through iHub to work for like an NGO to do data visualization. So we used to process the data in the backend using PHP, and then like we send it to the front end. Then we realized somebody had to do JavaScript, and because the guy who was leading the entire project couldn't write the JavaScript code himself, it was up to me to do JavaScript. At that point in time, I actually hated JavaScript, which is weird. But without a choice. Why do I say without a choice? Is because growth is painful, and growth is also challenging. And then that was the only path I had to grow forward. And in addition, I'm not just saying in terms of like learning better in software development, but learning, I don't know, but just slightly making more money than what I used to make back then. And so they offered me like twice the salary to do JavaScript, and I was like, why not? And then when my first 3 months of JavaScript were very frustrating, almost I think 6 to 8 months, maybe 9 months probably, were very frustrating, as it will be for everybody, because JavaScript is it's so complex. But one beauty about JavaScript is front-end engineers are a game to find. And so when I ended up learning like really JavaScript really well, I became like a really sought after front-end engineer. So which is amazing. Along the way, I've fiddled. Since then, I've stuck with JavaScript, but in between my journey, I have fiddled with Golang. I touched based on C just to learn systems engineering and like really understand like how machines, like hardware talks to software. Then after that, I fiddled with Golang, which like was a far better improvement than C itself. And then I fiddled with Python, just as an alternative to PHP as a backend. And honestly, I've loved them all. But eventually, like PHP, not so much anymore, because like I find like Python, Golang, or these like upcoming languages, for example, Node.js, have become a lot more powerful than PHP, and so PHP has been somehow left behind. I'm not saying it's not usable anymore, but it's actually been left behind, as Node.js, Python are easier and faster languages to deal with a thriving hyper community. In terms of frameworks, I started out in JavaScript. I started out with as obvious, jQuery. Like if you haven't gone through jQuery, I don't think you should call yourself a JavaScript engineer. I'm joking though. So I started with jQuery, as obvious, 1.4, and then it got to around 2. Then like the first version of Angular came out, which had like this weird way of writing code called dependency injection. And then after that, I jumped onto Angular. No, I was supposed to jump onto Angular 2, but along the way, I met Vue.js, and then I was like, wait, Angular 2 has become much more complicated, but Vue.js is literally what Angular 2 was supposed to be. So I decided to go to Vue.js, and ever since then, I've stuck to Vue.js. For years, I've preached that Vue.js would eventually catch up and like match one-to-one with React, and people thought it was a silly prediction, but I've ended it's literally ended up catching up, and actually at some point in time, it might possibly beat React. Why I say this is because one thing Vue.js offers is structure, and like like you can go to one Vue.js and the other Vue.js project and literally like match the structures of the projects easily. In React, everybody just does whatever they want to do their way, and that like they lose standards. That's pretty much it on my journey to where I am today. So like right now I'm still on Vue.js 2. I think it's 2.6, and like I don't think I'll ever leave Vue.js for the years to come. Even the product we're building right now, you're building on Vue.js. I'll talk about more why we made these decisions to work with Vue.js rather than Angular 2, or I think it's Angular 6 right now, or React. So that's pretty much it in my journey from like zero to Vue.
From
zero
from zero to hero. So you said something interesting, Eugene, at the beginning. You said you said that WordPress, you didn't like WordPress because it does stuff for you. Please expound what you mean by that WordPress does stuff for you.
My journey has been full of curiosity since I started software engineering, and I think that's what is what like has really rewarded me. Because I remember going into an interview with IHAB to become a software engineer. Kiri was the head of like the IHAB like a consulting department at that point in time, and I told him like I code web applications from scratch using PHP. I don't use any framework at all, and he laughed at me. And at that point in time, like it made so much sense why he'd laughed at me after a couple of months later when I dived into using Laravel. Because you won't know why people use a framework until you don't use one. I don't know if that makes sense. You won't know why React is useful or Vue.js or Angular 9 is useful until you try to build an entire web application using jQuery alone. Even to make your life harder, try just build a web application using plain old JavaScript without any framework or anything. And then it really leads you to learning, okay, it's very hard to do it. To be honest, it will take you a lot longer. Probably it will take you, like, if you're supposed to build the application in 2 weeks using Vue.js or Angular, whatever front-end framework, it's going to take you around like 6 to 9 months to even ship out the minimum viable product of the application you're building. And as much as it's going to take you longer, I encourage anybody who's starting out to do this, because you won't understand the fundamentals of a framework if you don't do this. Because when you do this and then you go back and like try and build the entire application using a framework, for example, React, Vue, or Angular, then you realize what the hell it's actually doing for you. In addition, you've learned everything about a browser by just writing plain old JavaScript language. And so when a framework does something for you, you generally know the underlying engine or whatever it's doing. You can literally go to the code of the framework and read it and see what exactly it's doing and understand it. Most people right now use React, but do not even understand how React gets things done. So it's not so bad. It will get things done for you. But I think when you're growing as a senior, going into a senior software engineer to do even certain optimizations, you really need to understand the fundamentals of what the framework is doing for you. And so literally that's my reason was like why I didn't like WordPress at that point in time. I was a beginner. I wanted to learn like what exactly does WordPress do for you in all the underlying like I mean, in the intrinsic values of the framework itself. So if I'm going to send email, instead of using the framework to send email, let me write an email sending framework for myself. The funny thing is, if you go to my GitHub repo, you'll also find like I tried building a web framework. Like I tried like replicating Express.js from like the Node.js Express.js framework. I replicated it to Golang. So I had to study the Express.js framework and then rewrite the code to fit the Golang language. I'll share the link in the comments. But even by just doing that, I understood the fundamentals of everything a framework does for you. And actually that leads you to even like be able to build on top of framework and create certain customized plugins for your applications or for your clients. So that's why I decided not to go with WordPress or and try.
Actually, I want to plus one that because it's not, these frameworks do not exist because doing the things for ourselves is rocket science. It's actually not. It's just that it saves time. And for the guys who are actually in to learn and not just to put apps together, it's a very interesting journey, and it's actually something very enjoyable. So we have talked about the stacks you guys have been into up to now. So I think we can delve deeper into what you currently work with and why, what informed the shift. So you can start with Frank.
Okay. Wow. So for backend, and this is where Alela, please feel free to kick me out of this call. But for my backend, I partially use Firebase, very partially use Firebase.
Hi, Frank.
Most of the
Frank.
time.
Frank.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Please tell us what you mean by back end.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to
have those of us who are like beginners on the call. So what do you mean when you say back end?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to explain that. So when I say backend is this is everything to do with storing data. This is everything to do with like where do I store my images, where do I put my database and stuff like that. So for me, and this is like whether it's SQL, no SQL, doesn't matter. And so for my backend, that bit of it all and some other really heavy and core functionality, I use Azure. That is Windows, or now it's called Microsoft Azure. And that's like the offering from Microsoft. That's what I use. Then for the other sort of like stuff that I know I can quickly spin up, I use Firebase. And so we have like a mix of the two. And then I have a custom plugin that sits in between and can like transfer information in between. And so why I do that is because why I use Azure for my backend and why I decided to stick to it and not Firebase is because one, I guess it's the clients that I started working with. And so when you have very, very large enterprise clients who are like these Microsoft people and they have all of these things that are working for them already, what you're forced to do is like you really need to learn like, okay, so I've built my Android application, how do I plug in to the backend with this Azure stuff? They need reports generated. Someone tells you, okay, please, I need to know how many people are doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 within the app. It's easy for me to generate that with a couple of clicks to do Microsoft Azure. And so that's what I use for my backend. Heavily use that for my backend. And then part of it is that I still have Firebase to do some things to do with if I want to acquire users, if guys want to run ads, if they want to set up like custom reporting, people want to check on things like, oh wait, is there an update that is being forced that we need to like do a payload to a certain kind of application, to a certain kind of like feature that we need to like send a payload to these users about it, we do that. Then over and above, I think obviously my part that I use is I do not touch web. Like no matter what, I will not touch web. And I think that decision. I used to do front-end web development. I stopped doing front-end development when I just realized, you know what, I have a very limited period of time on this earth, and it's better for me to focus and be really good at one thing. And the one thing that I decided to focus on was Android development. And so for Android, I use Kotlin and not Java. And the reason why I use Kotlin is if you go and read just on the landing page for Android, it will tell you, or a couple of years ago, Google tweeted and said the official first-class language for developing Android applications is Kotlin. So I know you can still make applications with Java. You can still make applications with JS. You can make all of those things with that. But I just decided to focus more on Kotlin, and that's what I decided to become good at. And that has been for the last, I guess even till now, that's what like I have to play with it, and that's what I'm used to knowing it. And then about now it's probably 2 months, 2.5 months. Got this job, and I think primarily was because of that whole experience in the mobile space. And so I started using Flutter, and me using Flutter is, I'll tell you the truth, that's a conversation for a totally different setting. I'm not going to get into that, but just know like I use Flutter right now. We have that whole 100% setup from the DevOps to like even to do various things on a backend that sits on Azure and also Firebase. So I guess that's me, nothing more, and that's where I play at. So the rest of the services, I just get them inside. If I'm making my Android application, it moves in between using libraries that people have already made to me developing libraries for myself. And this, why I develop libraries for myself that I can use continuously, is if I notice this is something that will probably be used by this organization for the longest period of time, and they're releasing 5-10 applications. And so I just build a quick library that you can easily import or implement within Android itself. Yeah, so that's me. Thanks, Posila.
Yeah, so actually Kotlin makes sense, because if I'm not wrong, I think Google also officially advised guys to move to Kotlin. But I'm not in the Android space, so I can't really be sure. I have a question. You say that you're using Azure. One of the reasons you're using Azure is because you found the clients. It already works for the clients that you're working for right now. So is an engineer supposed to blend in with what they find in the organization by default, or can we like negotiate and make cases for different stacks? Do we just work with whatever we have found without like asking questions?
Okay, cool.
That's a good question. I can answer that.
Yeah, that's for Frank.
Okay, Frank, you can go. It's yours.
No, you'll chip in. But let me just say this: the reason why the reason why I actually shifted, and like I'll say, if you join an organization, the first thing is not you to go and say this works. They have a system. They've been using this thing for some time, so they have reasons as to why they're using it. And I guess for me it was because. So let me give you an example. Like currently, you have a whole DevOps setup within Azure. You have the backend, you have everything, like they've been using it for the last couple of years. So they have data there are so many things that work. It's a whole, again, Firebase and the two have worked with both of them. And so I'll tell you, like, both of them can be very confusing for someone who's starting out, because there are all these many things that you can do. Because even one small feature, like let's say within Firebase, like Crashlytics, for instance, you can get really specific, and it can even eat up to 1 month of your time just trying to like say, I want to customize it like this, and that is based on like different areas. And so I guess when I joined, it was more, when I started working in one of these organizations, you look at all of these very top, I guess like these companies who have systems that are like, they sit in places like Geneva, let's say. So it sits in Geneva, and then you have that distribution happening all around. you know, so you have like in Geneva, but then they have an office within Africa, 2, 5, 10 offices within Africa, and all of them have their backends and everything. I mean, this is everything from Microsoft, like their official like Office packages and stuff. All of them are connected there. And so when you have someone who tells you they need to migrate from SharePoint to the latest one, and the whole of the IT company, you have 90% or 99% of people who know how to use that specific stack. Sometimes you can't try and introduce the new thing. Like a good example is, at first it was a fight between Java and developing an Android app within Java or Kotlin, but then they saw the point. Because when you sit down with them and then you start showing like, hey, look, we've written 24 lines to do this thing. I am literally writing this in like 2 lines and it's doing the same thing. And they're like, wait, what? And so it's not that something is bad or something is better per se. It's just that when I come, I have to adapt. I believe like as a software engineer, you have to adapt. Not to say that if there's a shiny new tool out there, you agree with it and just jump onto it. No, I actually did weigh the benefits, the pros and cons of using, like forcing people to use this over this other one. And I saw it actually does make sense because they have other business systems that are totally plugged in into this backend. And it really, really works well. It really works smoothly. So that's the reason why I actually just was like, okay, cool, this makes sense. Initially, I was very resistant to it, but then I guess after using it for some time, I was like, this is actually a good tool that I love how to use. So that's the thing.
I think one thing to contribute.
Yeah, so I think your point about
I think one more thing to contribute is that one thing is I've realized is as a software engineer, which I also changed in my mind later on, is that when we write code earlier on, is we keep thinking we're writing code for us, like for me personally. And that's a very bad way to think as a software engineer. The thing you need to think of is that when you're writing code that will be shared with the world, not with the entire world. If it's open source, yes, with the entire world, but with the companies, you're writing code that will be shared across with everybody else who will actually put their hands onto that code. So it's not your code, it's our code, because like you alone can't solve a problem unless you want to be like a one-man island. You have to solve problems together, and that's why we have companies. Even the word company is just like it's a number of people coming together to solve a problem from a business perspective. And so like when you write code, you need to stop of thinking of it's my code or it's my script or it's my page or it's my component, but rather it's our component. Because one thing you realize is when you write code for over 6 or 7 years, there's so much code you leave behind that you'll never ever have access to it, but somebody else will have access to it. And if you make their lives difficult, you're just being selfish. So the idea of thinking it's our code makes things a lot easier, and even makes things like when you're making decisions becomes easier. For example, you won't make people shift because you'll make them uncomfortable, yet they've been doing this and it's already working. So why would you like do that in the first place? Also, like when like you want new people to come in, you can't just say like today we are doing Rust and like think you'll easily find like a Rust engineer here in Nairobi. You need to think of such things like that.
Yeah, so in addition to that, I think that also buttresses the point about software engineers learning fundamentals and not just frameworks. Like for you, if you know front-end only React, like you don't know anything about the browser, it won't be that easy for you to switch maybe to Vue or Angular. Like if there's like vendor lock-in to a framework or a platform, you won't be as flexible. So apart from what works and what has already been optimized for a client or an organization, what else usually makes you decide what platform to choose, right?
Using that specific programming language, how many people are capable, how many people are available? Because if you're trying to look for, like, for example, if you try and do your project or your entire company's project in Golang, good luck finding like good Golang developers, or even like any Golang developers in Nairobi or Kenya. And then the second, like, if you can find them, how affordable are they? Because like there are two things that distribute affordability too. So like I think I've mentioned 3 points here. One is like who's coming onto your team. Second thing is how available are these people who are coming into your team. And then the third thing is how affordable are they? Because for example, like US right now is struggling finding COBOL developers, and I'm sure if they find one, they're super expensive because it's very rare to find one. So I think those 3 major key points like really factor in when you're like deciding which framework or language you're going to use. So for example, like we chose Vue.js, which is like, yes, it's not so easy to find like Vue.js developers, but it's easy to translate or like convert any React or Angular developer into Vue, because Vue is just a lot simpler to understand and use. So that was the decision that went behind for us to use Vue.js. And the reason why we use Node.js is, as a startup, you want to minimize the cost and also like challenge your developers at the same time. So what happens is you use one language that they're going to work with on the front end, and at the same time when they come to the back end, it's the same language, it's just a different structure and like mental organization. So that's why we chose like JavaScript across the entire platform. At one point we also chose to use, instead of consuming JSON endpoints as any normal company provides, we decided to use GraphQL. Why did we decide to use GraphQL? One, it enforces a specific standard on how you write requests and responses. And so that means that instead of everybody like sending like data however they want to structure it, GraphQL will guide everybody to do the same thing across the entire team. So I think I've mentioned a number of points there. I'll pass it on to Frank.
Yeah. So I guess let me just improve on. Let me just not improve. Let me add on to that by saying, when Eugene was talking about even the number of people, like the people coming onto the team or the people you're working with, I also look, or I would add to also look at what's the community around this stack that I want to use. So for instance, right now, I think there was a day we were with a pal of mine and he was doing machine learning stuff, and for some reason he wanted to use this programming language called Julia, and like, so he wants to use Julia, and I'm like, okay, cool, that's fine. So do you know how to go about it? And so he goes to the beginning part and does it very quickly, and he's good to go. And so the next thing you know is a couple of days later, he checks in and is like, dude, this is the hardest thing ever. The community is not as responsive as I would have imagined it to be compared to the other Python, like developer communities and stuff. And so for me, I also look at what's the community around what's the community around this thing that I want to choose, this stack I want to choose. And I'm usually very picky and touchy on such kind of things. And so, for instance, if I could explain why, for instance, Android for me made sense quickly, was because I had both humans who I could easily call up and ask these questions. And then at that time, I think there was no Android developer community when I was starting out. It was like 2013, 2012-ish, 2013. And so I was like, okay, cool. So this thing is not happening. And so the other thing was, in as much as I can go online and ask questions on Stack Overflow, we all know the experience on Stack Overflow. You ask a question and someone answers you and you're thinking, what in the world did I do wrong to this guy? I think I asked the question rightly. And so, I mean, you have that. And then also, I'm very careful in looking for human components around. So for instance, now Eugene does Vue.js and I'm getting into programming. Maybe if I know he is a friend of mine, most of the time it starts to influence such kind of decisions. I'm not saying 100% or it should, but it starts to influence it. I guess two other things would be, apart from the community and stuff, would be, one is, do I love it? So that's the thing. Once I start playing around with this thing for like 1 to 2 days, do I love this thing or do I not love it? If I do not love it, I'm not lying to you. For me, I drop it. I don't even waste any second playing around with that. The other thing is marketability, and also the space that I'm playing at. I mean, the example that Eugene gave, like you'll find most businesses are on PHP. So then if you pop up with another tool, trust you me, how businesses look at you. And I know as software engineers, sometimes we say, no, I'm just writing code for fun. That's good. until you get to a point where you need to start making money, because you can't code on an empty stomach forever. And so for me, the way I look at it is I have to be marketable also out there. So right now I am mostly dealing with enterprise guys. And so if I'm dealing with enterprise guys, those guys are literally just going to tell you, this is what we use. And since this is what we use, it actually makes sense for you to start quickly adjusting to that. If that's the field you want to play at, because you feel like that's where you're going to make money, that's the thing. The other bit also is look at the trends, what's going to come ahead, what is being killed and stuff like that. Just keep yourself aware of what's going on within the communities and all this, that place that you want to play at. And as you want to say, like, let's say I want to go to Rust. Is Rust something, what's the support behind Rust? Is this 100% owned by a company, or is it this something that is open source and things like that? So yeah. Pasila?
I think the last thing is, if you're going to choose like a language.
Yeah, so Frank, you have brought out two very...
Sorry, Eugene?
Yeah, go ahead, Eugene.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I think my internet is it's way behind. I think if you're ever going to choose like a language of example which is like not locally available, you also need to change your mentality. Like you need to change your mentality and find how you're gonna access like the market you're going to access. So for example, if you're in love with Julia and you're into the community in Julia, yes, it's gonna take you a lot longer to get a job. There's a high chance you'll probably never get a job here in like Nairobi, Kenya. But if you find the right community, because right now, like for example, in this, like right now, due to Corona, the world has moved to become like an entire online platform, and so pretty fast than it ever did. And so you find your Julia community, and you just become really good at Julia. And then like you try and find jobs through the Julia community, and I'm pretty sure you're gonna get one. But the idea is to stop thinking about yourself as a local developer and to start thinking about yourself as a global engineer, or basically work towards one. Yes, you can start working for like Kenyan companies and everything else, but the idea is to scale yourself globally. Do not lock yourself. I think as a software engineer, the beauty of the world is on the internet. So basically you have access to everything in the world. And so if you tread the right path, you're gonna like head there either way. So for example, like I spend a lot of time like in the Ethereum community, and like they know me. Yes, I'm from Kenya, but if I was ever going to be an engineer, people would hire me in a remote sense, because one, code doesn't matter in terms of location. But also, I need to keep in mind it will be harder for me to be hired here locally, because it's a rare language to find in a local environment, in the current local environment. If I was in Europe or US, that would be a different story. But right now, when I'm in Africa, I need to consider what is my surrounding, and then I look at like, okay, maybe this is the rare language I'd like to do. But then again, I really want to put across like Frank's point is that you need to love what you do, because if you don't love what you do, it's a very frustrating journey.
Yes, actually, you have to have the passion, and it doesn't have to be all about the money, especially not in the beginning, because that's not enough glue to keep you going through the bugs and errors that take weeks and months. So passion is very key and important, because also I think a larger percentage of the very good engineers in the world are self-taught, right? It's not like they did official computer science or computer engineering papers or anything. Am I right? Or am I just guessing?
I am one of them.
No comment.
Are you the best in the world?
I think I am.
No comment.
All right, Eugene.
Like lazima ujichoche. Ukikosa kujichocha, nani atakuchocha?
All right. So guys, before we spotlight on JavaScript, I think I want to build upon Frank's point about engineering teams don't exist in silos, like they exist within business contexts, right? And sometimes we get so lost into the tech and the coding, we forget that apps and systems don't exist in localhost, right? They exist in other machines. And wherever they exist, we pay for stuff. Like we pay for databases, we pay for servers. So I'm just curious about cost considerations when it comes to what stack you're choosing, right? And how far a stack can take you. So for example, if I have 10,000 shillings, can I build an app that all like a social media app for all Nairobians to connect, for example, right? So I'd like us to go into the numbers of how far can a stack take me, right? And also to add into the point that we usually have guys like Google communities. You can get packages from them, right? If you're a startup, if you're a dev, like you can get Google Cloud and Firebase without paying etc. So let's talk about the numbers. And also maybe if you can touch on what's the highest build you've ever had? Like, do you run systems that cost 1 million shillings per month? Do you run systems that cost 100 shillings per month? And what's the scale of those?
So I think I have a good answer there. When I was at RBI, which is like a Canadian company which creates like a product called Tim Hortons, literally they had by the way, they had a $40 million budget for software. Now what did I learn from this? It's literally just like resources lead to like.
Hey, you should have paused for effect. 40 million. You should have paused for effect. 40 million. Wow.
I don't think he's used to it.
They had 40. Like I'm not. It doesn't even. It never sank in my mind. But this is what we used to do with it. Like, but we never even used 1% of that $40 million in budget. One is like, yes, money leads to a lot more access to terms of like, so these are the things we learned from that. Like money leads to access to a lot of resources around the internet. We literally used to play with a lot of like Amazon infrastructure in our development environment. And like, for example, like we were two Kenyan engineers in the Canadian company. And so literally each one of us would cost the company. It was literally how much? It was like up to like 500,000 Kenya shilling. We were deploying different VMs. We were deploying like different virtual machines, and just to test out like specific features that we wanted to use. And that like was crazy because we'd leave like 16 servers, which are like really high skilled in sizes in running. And like we'd have to like destroy them later, but we didn't have to worry about destroying them. Now, like come back to the startup we're in is when you're in a startup, for example, here in Kenya, and like you're a startup locally based and you haven't fundraised any money and you're not an established enterprise, there's a high chance you have to use free products. So for example, you'd pretty much want to stay away from Google App Engine Flex, which is like a great product, but the problem is it's a paid product and which might like lead to like expensive costs that the startup can't afford it. So you might eventually choose Heroku over Google App Engine because of that specific reason. Another reason is, for example, is you might choose to find jQuery engineers over React engineers if you really want to keep your cost low. If you want to like maintain like a good UX UI platform and build like a really credible application, there's a high chance you'll use React, Angular, and JS. And so you'll have one of the reasons that will lead you to deciding that is one is your preference. Two is where you actually hosting the application, and three, how much does each engineer actually cost? And then like your server costs won't be as big as your engineer's cost. And so this is good if you're an engineer right here. You need to think of it in this way. Yes, it's good to be like expensive as an engineer, but for a specific reason. What do you offer the company? There's a high chance somebody who actually there's a high chance somebody who knows for example, front end, back end, DevOps, and database will be hired over somebody who only knows for example, front end only, because the guy who knows all the counterparts, who tend to become like the full stack engineers, will give much more value to the company versus the guy who only knows front end. And then yes, of course, you'll also need experience in the things you've worked on. So for example, since we worked on the Amazon servers in the Canadian company, I know so much about Amazon right now. So if a company is ever going to hire somebody on Amazon experience, I can talk about my experience in the Canadian infrastructure, and that will give me much more opportunities than somebody else. But also, these opportunities rarely come by. So when you ever get an opportunity to work on something unique, or has adequate resources for you to work on that specific thing, I think it's always a good idea to jump onto it. For us, I think the highest cost we have right now is server and the database, because we don't like hosting the databases ourselves in a VPS, so we prefer managed databases. So we have a MongoDB database in the Atlas platform they have. And then our backend is hosted in Google App Engine. One is because, yes, we can technically afford the cost. And also is because we needed to use Flex for a specific reason. We would have used App Engine, the normal App Engine, but because Flex offers the capability of being able to store documents in the container itself, and there's a reason why we wanted to do that, because we process some documents in that scenario. So we ended up using Google App Engine Flex over the normal Google App Engine. So that gives you a bit of learning lesson why you decide to use something over the other. Why did we choose Google? Most cases because I have worked with it before, and then the second thing, I've worked with it before. One, because I've had access to it as a GDE. So you see, also my history plays a role there too. I also think Heroku is equally great. And will sustain your platform for as long as possible, but also it depends on where do you historically come from, which was the first platform you met, and did you actually like it and like the experience of the other one, and so forth. I think that's just my answer, by just jumping around through different points.
I think Pasila, I guess for Android developers, it's pretty much straightforward. Go to online, search for what is this thing called? Yeah, search for Android Studio, download Android Studio. It's free for you to use. Just accept the terms and conditions. Download, free for you to use. I know people who still develop Android apps on Eclipse. I don't know why you would anyway, but I mean, download Android Studio, start using it. Start using Kotlin, and you move on from there. I guess the other bit is now where it comes to the questions of the backend bit of it, and backend is just where are you going to store your data, your images, and things like that. I will just say, you might be hearing Eugene and myself probably talk about these tools that we are using currently, but it's important for you to understand that when you're starting out, you don't have the liberty probably, or the financial resources, or you don't have organizations that are probably behind you to use some of these tools. And so the best idea for you probably is, I love what you can't have an excuse to not know how to integrate your app with a backend, because if you go to Firebase, there's a very good free plan that if you actually exhaust the free plan, please pay. As in, I'm just saying, please pay if you can, please pay. The other alternative is you can continue playing around with the free stuff for some time. There's the whole idea behind people saying, oh, I want to build my own backend infrastructure. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But there are all these other 1,000,001 considerations that someone else has already done for you. I'm just going to put it out there. I don't work for Google or Microsoft or any of these companies that we're probably talking about. Yeah, so, so I'm just like saying that, for instance, for your backend, you're an Android developer, just get Android Studio, you quickly start coding. There are 1,000,001 ways in which you can start using all those things. And then like, the beauty is most of these tools, and that is including Firebase, is that you quickly have access. The Firebase dashboard gives you access to so many things that you can quickly plug in and you just continue using. So I don't think there should be any form of excuse for someone not to start out. I don't think it's that expensive to get started with Android development. The only expense is the amount of time you need to put in. So yeah, that's it, Pasila.
Okay. Thanks, Frank, Eugene. So we are really over time. I think for the JavaScript point, I'll just point guys to Stack Overflow's 2019 developer survey. So they have all these data and analytics from developers from all over the world. So we see that JavaScript, you can see the programming scripting markup languages. I found this very interesting that JavaScript is ahead of HTML, CSS because HTML, CSS is common. Like whether you're doing Ruby, Python, whatever, we all meet at HTML, CSS. Yet the JavaScript guys are more. So this is very funny actually.
No, actually,
because everybody does this.
Not actually, because
for the web developers,
yes.
You're really kick us.
No. Like I was supporting you in terms of
I'll come check that out.
I was supporting you in terms of like writing web applications. You definitely can't like avoid HTML and CSS, but like system programs and command line programs not require HTML and CSS, and you can write them with JavaScript nowadays.
Pasila?
All right, yeah. So for the web frameworks, jQuery is also another interesting one. Yes.
Pasila? Yeah, can I comment on the previous, just to go back to the, so the previous slide where, because I'm seeing some of the chats here, guys are saying like Java, Kotlin, and there's all this debate. So like, if you look at this list, you see Java is like number 5, and then you see Kotlin is like slightly down below with like a 6.4% usage. And probably it's important for me to comment why this is the case right now, is because we still have a lot of legacy systems on Java, running with Java. And so it's important for people to realize like, hey, the change is coming sooner or later, it's going to catch up with people, but that is not to quickly tell people, drop your Java, run to something else. No, there are a lot of legacy systems still running on Java. That is Java for desktop, and like so many tools are still running on Java. And like even Google, if you look at some of their tech stack, they still use Java for, if I'm not wrong, Gmail or something, or some of their backend and some of their servers, they still use Java. But when it comes to like purely Android stuff, yes, Java still has apps there, but Kotlin is quickly replacing it. So I think that's the thing that I can just say about it. Sorry. Yeah. Done.
All right. Awesome. So we've come to the end. For these slides, these are stuff you can get from Stack Overflow site. If you just Google Stack Overflow developer surveys. And I think I'd like to hand over this call back to Alela. Thank you guys for your wisdom, your encouragement. Some of those words have really touched me personally. Yeah. Alela.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Pasi. So once again, thank you to our speakers, Eugene and Tamre, and to our moderator, Pasila. My name is Alela, Community Manager at Google, based in the Kenya office. So due to time, we won't be able to answer the questions that were posted on the Slido, but we will try as much as possible to answer them on the link that was shared. But should you be having any other questions, just feel free to post it on the link. We're going to keep the link open for any questions that are going to come through. Next week, we will be having a session on building scalable products, and we will share more information with everybody who signed up to previous events. I think I'll hand this over to Max from DeCodEd. And I will say he has something to share at the end of the call. So before we have Max, kindly, Awal, feel free to share any content that you feel you need to share. Awal.
Hi, Lila. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you very much, Eugene and Frank. It was really, really impactful, and I really enjoyed everything. Just a few things. So basically, I just have a few conversations with students on the call. I think beside this program here, beside this session where we're trying to probably have discussions around how people grow and how people can scale their skills to become world-class developers and things like this. I just wanted to announce that we're still receiving applications for developer parent clubs lead at different locations in different universities across Sub-Saharan Africa. And one of our goals at DSC is to try to help students bridge the gap between theoretical computer science concepts and practical knowledge. So we make available content from our developer team at Google and make it available for students to be able to get the needed technical skills before they graduate. So you could probably, Elena will post the link to apply to become a DSC lead, and we will see you later. Elena, over to you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Awal.
Yep.
So before Max goes, somebody asked a question about how to get started. So Google, in partnership with Andala and Pluralsight, are having a program called the Google Africa Developer Scholarship Program. I have posted a link to which you can follow to apply. I'll also be posting a link to where you can get the place to apply to be a Developer Students Club lead. And so I'll hand this over to Max to take over to tell more about what DeCodEd is doing in the space of technology, the ecosystem. Yeah, Max, sorry.
Thanks, Alela. As I do that, I'll also wrap up. So DeCodEd is going to start a few short online courses just to keep devs engaged around data science and around developer operations. And we're also organizing a really big conference called Tafakari. This will probably happen later in the year after COVID. Tafakari basically stands for Think. And it's essentially a meeting of the minds of some of the more experienced devs in Nairobi. So that should be interesting. And over the coming weeks, we'll share more information around some of the courses we'll be running, which will be led by community leaders as well, and the conference as well. So we'll keep you guys updated as events pop up. For now, that's it. It's very unfortunate we didn't get more time for questions, but I hope to see you guys next week for the next topic. This one has been very interesting. It's been really great to hear deep dives from and shares from Frank and Eugene. It really has put a lot of context into kind of the industry. What are the numbers? What's the technology? How should we be thinking? So it was a really great session, and I hope to see you guys next time.
Goodbye, everyone.
All right. Goodbye.
Okay.